Hello, this is Kara again, and I have another video for you today. Today I will be talking about one of my favorite topics, and I talked about this more at length when I first started the channel, and then I took a break from it, and I'm sort of feeling ready to revisit this topic, but I figured we would start from the beginning and work our way from there. So what we're going to be talking about today is watercolor. I'm super excited. I have all these notes, and hopefully I will be able to get through the notes and provide accurate information for you to talk about watercolor and working with watercolor, the things that I love about working with watercolor, and why I think it's a fun medium to work in coloring books, even if it's a little challenging and a little bit different than the way you would work with watercolor on watercolor paper. So first thing I want to talk about to you is I want to talk to you about what watercolor paints are. Watercolor paints are, they are made with pigment and gum arabic as a binder. Gum arabic allows it to be soluble in water so that you can get the pigment on top. You can get the pigment into the paper like this, and you can create. I'm working on right now with Inktense. This I'm working on right now with Inktense. Ink is similar in some ways, but ink is ink and not pigment. And ink tends not to be as light fast as artist grade watercolor paints, because they're generally made with dyes, which is how you get the ink to flow the way that it does. But this was made with artist grade Sennelier watercolor paints. And as you can see, it's totally possible to use artist grade watercolor paints in coloring books. I've done it before. I was actually the first one to do a video on this topic, and there'll be a link up there to that first video that I did on this a long time ago. So it's been a passion of mine, and one of the things that I like about watercolor versus colored pencil and versus other sorts of mediums that we use with coloring books is that it is fast. Whereas it can take me, anywhere from a couple of weeks, 30 plus hours working on a single page to have it completed. I can do a page in watercolor in, a couple of hours. Something like this took me, I don't know, this took me a while to do, like an hour, it's just a long time, including drying time. This was like an hour and a half. It wasn't really that long by colored pencil, but if I did the same exact thing with colored pencil, it would have taken me a whole lot longer than an hour to do. So there's that. So that's one of the reasons why I love watercolor. Anyway, so let's talk about, so let me talk about what watercolor is, as I started to do earlier. Watercolor is pigment plus gum arabic. And one of the differences with watercolor versus colored pencil is that because it's pigment plus gum arabic, the pigment really matters, and companies will tell you what pigments they use for their various watercolor paints. Whereas with colored pencils, companies almost never tell you what pigments they use. They'll use, even artist grade, they really won't tell you what pigments they use. They probably use a variety of pigments in a variety of different binders. But for today's exercise and introduction, we're going to be using Cotman, but you can use any number of things, and I'll talk more about your various options. So there are pigments with binder. Student grade watercolor paints like these will often have a lower pigment load. They may use fillers and other things in there in addition to the pigments. I'm not going to use this brush. It's small. I'm not going to use this brush. I'm not even going to lie to you and tell you I'm going to use this brush. And Eastbolt does a really good job of doing reviews, and she will use included brushes in her review. Not I. I'm not stressing myself out like that. Sorry, not sorry. So anyway, so they'll use like fillers and other stuff to extend it. And this is one of the benefits of artist grade paints, is that they will have a higher pigment load usually. However, you can make great art with anything. This was done with student grade Sennelier paints. I was supposed to put the date on it, but I did not put the date on it. But this was done with student grade Sennelier paints. So you don't need artist grade materials. Remember, as I like to say, the artist makes the materials don't make the artist. So, but I like working with artist grade materials for the reason that I mentioned previously, that they have higher pigment load, they have less filler, and a lot of times the colors are more vibrant and they are stronger. So, gum arabic as a binder. There's another thing going around too. My favorite brand is Sennelier. A lot of people will say Sennelier uses honey as a binder. Honey is not the binder. Gum arabic is always the binder for your watercolor paints. What they do is they add honey to the binder. So all the companies will have their own sort of binder formulation, where they'll use gum arabic and they'll use other things in their binder formulation. Sennelier, M. Graham, and possibly other companies will add honey to the paint, to the binding medium as they're binding the pigment and the paint. Honey makes it stay softer in the tubes. And they can also make it for a little bit easier to re-wet once they've been dried. So there's a lot of reasons to use honey, and honey can also act as a little bit of a preservative because honey is a natural preservative. So so those are some of the reasons why some companies use honey. Other companies don't use honey because it can be, it can take forever to dry in the pan. Some colors never dry. That's another difference between watercolors and a colored pencil, is that with colored pencil, every single pencil usually feels the same. Probably, especially when you start getting into artist grade pencils, they should all feel around about the same. The exception is a couple of luminance colors. Even though they're high end, they will feel a little bit different with some colors because they have that higher pigment load. With these, for artist grade paints and even for student grade paints, each of them will feel different. They will have their own specific characteristics. And so this is one of the reasons why for watercolor, much more than for colored pencils, knowing the pigments can help make your experience a little bit easier. Now, the other thing is you'll see me working with a set of 12. With colored pencils, having the largest set is usually better. So people tend to have the entire set the company makes. So for my, you can see up there, that's up there, that's what I just showed you, is my full set of polychromos and my woodbox set of the Albrechter watercolor pencils. And for both of those, I have 120 colors, and I really appreciate having the 120 colors, and it works a lot better with 120 colors. Very few people will have the entire line of any one company for watercolor paints. I have the Sennelier only because I did a long video about that, but I do have the entire line of the Sennelier paints because I love them, and it's a long story, but the whole story is over there in that other video. But that's extremely rare, and I think Sennelier is the only company that sells you the entire line as a set anyway. For the most part, you will either get a prefabricated set of 12, sometimes 36, 24, and sometimes 48, and those are usually the largest prefabricated sets you can get. Some companies will have tube sets with different numbers of tube sets. Sennelier often comes out with a pack of, like a 10 pack of tubes in a special holiday box or something like that. And they also have a 10 pack, I think, in a travel set. Anyway, so the reason why is because unlike with colored pencils, where you need as many colors as possible and you layer them, with watercolor paints, you still do layer, but you create your own mixes with any number of colors. Usually, when you're first starting out, it's far easier to do with a simple triad of yellow, blue, and red, or a cyan, magenta, yellow, black. And Yves Bolt has a really good video on cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And the way that I prefer to do is I prefer to use the dual primary of a cool and a warm yellow, cool and a warm red, and a cool and a warm blue, plus oftentimes adding burnt sienna. because burnt sienna makes things a lot easier if you add burnt sienna. So that's your super basic introduction into watercolors. When you make a particular piece, you usually want to use as few colors as possible. So for this one, I did not do a good job of recording this, but for this, just looking at it off the top of my head, I probably used just 3 or 4 colors, and then I mixed a bunch of different colors to make the layers. And that's usually what you do when you're working with when you're working with watercolor, is you usually use a limited number in any one particular piece until you sort of get the hang of it, and then you can add more. But if you talk to people, you know, they will use just just 3, 4 colors, 5 maybe in a piece. You know, sometimes they'll use 6 is like a lot, in a piece. And then but you mix the colors together, and that's, I think, where a lot of people have a little bit of a challenge. But we're going to talk about mixing the colors in the next episode, but it's not nearly as hard as it looks. So anyway, so that's what watercolor is. And the other thing too that I wanted to talk about is I talked briefly earlier about knowing the pigment names and knowing the pigment numbers. For colored pencil, obviously it would be overwhelming to know the formulations of 120 different colors. But for watercolor paints, it is helpful to know the pigments, because having certain pigments will have certain characteristics. And I'll go into it more in the second part when we do a little bit of swatching. I'm not necessarily, you know what? Let me get this out. I'm not sure if I'm going to do the full swatching, but this is an example of the Sennelier student range came with the white, which I took out. But you will see that certain pigments, now this one uses a primary blue in place of a phthalo blue, but a phthalo blue has very specific characteristics. That's what I used here is PB 15 3. So PB stands for pigment blue 15-3, and that's phthalo blue, and that's usually a very strong staining, very sort of powerful color that mixes in with the next color really, really strongly. And then you have other pigments like PBR7, which stands for pigment brown 7. And pigment brown 7 is a versatile sort of like really varied pigment that can be burnt sienna, burnt umber, raw sienna, raw umber, natural sienna, natural umber. And it can just, like, in addition to those 6 colors, it can also sometimes appear as a green, which Sennelier has in their set. A PBR7 green. I forgot what they call their PBR7 green. I feel like it's earth green or something like that. Anyway, that's not the point. But these pigments also have their own sort of very earthy characteristics about the PBR7 pigments. So knowing the pigments can sort of help. For this series, we're not really going to focus too much on the pigments, but it's something to keep in mind. And even if you don't necessarily know or care at this point what the pigments are and what they do, I would advise you to keep a record of the pigments for whatever set you get, and then later on, as you get more experience with watercolors, then you can sort of look into that a little bit more, and we'll talk about it for later episodes. But those are the things that I wanted to talk about in terms of the pigments and the very, very basic sort of intro to what watercolor is. So I'm going to take a break, and then when we come back, I'm going to play with some watercolor paint a little bit, and I'm going to play with the Cotman set. All right. So we talked about the nature of watercolor paints. I'm going to talk really briefly about brushes and other materials that I like to use. I use 2 water cups. Hold on, let me show you. I use 2 water cups, a towel, or a sponge, and a little dropper. And this needle, I know, might look a little scary, but the needle actually just lets me, hold on, it just lets me add a little bit of water. I might have added a little bit too much to that yellow, but it just lets me add a little bit of water to these paints so that I can more easily use them It's a little bit weird doing this on camera, but that's why. And then when you see my videos, you'll see me have one of this. Is just a blunt-ended needle that I actually got from a pen store, believe it or not, for cleaning out fountain pens. But I use it to add a drop of water to my paints, and I'm just gonna let this sit for a minute, just for a quick second before we get started. The next thing that you're gonna need is brushes. When you're first starting out, I say that for your first, until you know how you're going to use your brushes, I would say stick with inexpensive brushes. The Winsor Newton Cotman is easy to find in art stores, and you can easily get it, and they work really well. They're synthetic. So really briefly, going to talk quite briefly about the 3 kinds of brushes that you will see. This is 100% synthetic. This is supposed to be imitation Sable. This is an Escoda Prado, and I use this one a lot in coloring books. When I'm coloring directly on coloring books, I like this one because as you can see, it has a very small area and it's not going to hold a lot of water. The next type that you will see a lot of, this is the Silver Black Velvet. These are really popular because they hold a lot more water than the synthetic, but they are a mix of synthetic and natural hair. I want to say squirrel. And then this one, as you can see, look at all that. That's going to hold a whole bunch of water. And it's going to deposit it much more evenly. This is a Raphael Kolinsky Sable made in France. This came with my Sennelier set of paints. This was my first time owning Kolinsky Sable. And I must say that as much as I love animals, I totally fell in love with this Kolinsky Sable. So there's that. So I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you that the synthetic product works exactly the same as the Kolinsky Sable. It does not. Maybe there's a mimic or some sort of imitation out there that works exactly the same, but I have not seen it. The Sable is fantastic. That being said, there are definitely a lot of choices depending on how you feel about animals and all that sort of thing. So there's that. So this is your brushes. Last thing you're going to need, actually most important thing you're going to need is paper. Now there's different theories about which one you should spend the most money on: paper, paints, brushes, or something else entirely. Paper can be anything from actual watercolor paper. You can really pretty much use any kind of paper, but I strongly advise that you stick with actual watercolor paper, or at the very least mixed media paper. Watercolor paper has a special sizing on it that allows it to stand up to water and to large. They also then tend to be thicker. This is a 140-pound paper. But if I can get the camera to focus on how thick that paper is, and this is not by far the thickest paper I've ever seen. There's a lot of coloring books out there. There's one in particular that says that it's made from Lux watercolor paper. It is not. It doesn't have the sizing. One of the main things is a lot of times, usually watercolor paper will be single-sided. They'll have a front and a back side because of that sizing that's attached to it. Depending on the brand, there is sometimes a huge difference between one side and the other, and sometimes not a big difference. And a lot of people will use both sides depending on the brand. I personally usually only use the right side of the watercolor paper, the side that is intended to be used. Although if you've seen my other books, you know that I will use both sides for other kinds of paper. Anyway, this is a different kind of paper. This is a 100% cotton mixed media paper. This is 90-pound paper. You can also find 90-pound watercolor paper. I like 100% cotton paper because it flows a little bit nicer. But so that's what I'm going to be using for this demonstration. Is I'm actually going to be using a 100% cotton 90-pound paper, and I'm going to be using it, attaching this to this book. You know, some people care, some people don't care. Some people like the fact when it crinkles up. I'm sort of ambivalent to it. I don't mind the crinkle up when the paper gets, but I want to minimize it because then it's hard to close the book if it's too much. So anyway, so there's that. So here we go. I'm just going to add these little bowl clips here. These little clips are just going to help keep it from getting too much. So we are going to start to do some painting. I am big on swatching, mixing charts, all that other stuff. I think it is really helpful You know what? I'm going to pause for a second to rearrange because I got a bunch of stuff that I used earlier to show you various aspects that I'm not going to use now. So I'm going to pause, rearrange myself, and then I will be right back. All right, so I'm just going to do some random scribbling with some paper. I switched to the 90-pound watercolor paper just because I figured that that would be easier. All right, so the way the paint works is pretty straightforward. Is you add a little bit of water to your brush, whatever brush you decided, and your paint right here. So just add some paint right there and add a little bit of water there, and that's your paint. And it's really that simple. And then you can take, you know, whatever wash you've created here, you can take it and you can apply it to the paper, and you see how it flows. Even though this is a, you know, this is a low load brush, you can see how it flows with the water. A little bit more water, get a little bit more paint, and then you can see, you know, how it flows. And like I said, this is 90-pound paper. So you can do that. You can make a couple of squares. One of the things that I learned to do early on, and that I'm glad I learned to do it early on because some people seem to struggle with it later, and I have very little problems with it, is making a nice even wash. And a nice even wash is great for your backgrounds, for your other stuff. When you color, just to show you a little bit of a difference, when you color, a lot of times you'll fill in the circle and then you'll go back in, and that can get you an even wash sometimes, but I find it easier if you do something slightly different, which is you take your amount that you're going to do and then you just go back and forth. Now, because this is a synthetic brush, it does drop all the pigment in the beginning. When you have an animal hair brush or even a blend, it'll give you a much more even full that. But you can see that that looks a little bit more even. The second one does. And then you can start to mix colors. Now, a lot of people also get confused with, and we'll go into this in more detail on a later video, a warm yellow, warm red, yada, yada, yada. So one of the easiest things that I have found is to think of things in terms of which way they lean. So for example, let me show you. Let me put this down right here. Let me show you this in this little swatch card. You can see, for example, you have two yellows, and you have one yellow that leans more orange, and you have one yellow that seems to lean a little bit more green, blue. So for the yellow that leans more orange, then I would mix that with a red that also seems to lean more orange. The same thing here. Between these two, I would say this one leans more towards blue purple. So that's the one that I would mix with the blue that leans more towards that color. Now, in this case, it's a little bit different because this blue is a really strong blue. But that's how I tend to mix things to get more even mixes, more cleaner mixes. Now, what you can do sometimes is if you want, let's say you want a purple that's not that clean. So you want like a subdued purple as well as opposed to a strong purple. What you can do is you can take your purple reddish red. You can take your purple reddish red, and you can mix that not with the blue that leans more towards purple, but with the other one. And this is a strong color, so I'm not going to take a lot of it. But you can, and then you get a little bit less vibrant purple. Let me show you. Let me show you the purple right here. You get a little bit less vibrant purple. See, you see that purple? It's also watery, but that has to do with how much water I applied. And as you get better, you'll sort of learn to manage that. I should have picked a bigger brush is what I should have done. But actually, my brushes, this is a size 2. That's the problem I'm having right now. You know what? I'm going to pause and switch to a size 4. That's the problem right there. I got a size 4 now. Now I feel better. Another difference between watercolor and colored pencil is with colored pencil, what you see is what you get. With watercolor paints, sometimes they will dry a little bit lighter than they first appear. Hold on, let me just get this back and blend a little bit more of this less than perfect red. Okay, see, that's too much. That's the other thing, is I have a tendency, and I will get better at this, but like I said, I'm not really a professional artist. I just do coloring books, and I will get better at this in time, but I have a strong tendency to mix way too much paint, which is why I like to use a porcelain palette, because with a porcelain palette, I can save it for my next project. I tend not to let stuff stay in the palette for a very long time, but I do, I do have it in there for like 1 or 2 later projects. But let's see here. Okay, see, that's so much. See, now you see what I mean about how it's a purple, but it's not your most vibrant popping purple. So what we then can do, and I'm gonna try this time to not use as much as I did last time, although I have that tendency. And then I'm gonna take this one here, which is a more, and this should give me a much more sort of popping, clean, vibrant purple than the first one that I got, because I used a blue that leans more towards that purplish line. If I got it right, yes, you can see the difference almost right away, even though there's way too much water to pigment ratio for me to illustrate the point. But you can see this purple has a little bit of a brownness to it, and it's not as clean as the other purple. That's because I made that choice. And you can do that if you don't want to have colors that stand out a little bit too much. You can see that here. Hold on, you can see that here. I'm also going to get, because I have this new setup, not only am I going to get a new wire for the mic, let me try to see if I can do a quick like monochrome fruit for you guys. Not only am I going to get a new setup. Oh, I should have sketched that out first, but that's okay. Not really an artist. I'm just going to do like a little bit of a abstract sketch with this, since I have so much of this color here. And you can get, it's also a little bit easier to get clean washes if you have enough pigment from start, rather than if you try to go back and clean it up. But anyway, I'm just going to do this here. Let this dry a little bit. Maybe do a different shape here. So I'm also going to get another light. I want to get another light over here in this side, because Laura tells me that it's not dark, but to me these videos feel really dark now. So I'm going to get another 5 light bulb thing on that side with 5 daylight light bulbs. And I need one more wire for this mic, but once I get that wire going, it's going to be so awesome, because I'm going to get a wire and a little mic arm that I think I'm going to hook up to one of these little bookshelvy things, and then just have it go like over my head, and hopefully it won't cast any shadows. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so anyway, so just doing a little bit of random rough sketches with this. And then the next time we do this, I'm going to talk a little bit more about brush strokes, and how you can use your brush strokes, the different kinds of brush strokes that there are, and how different brushes can help with that. You can have sort of different kinds of brushes. Let me see here. Try to go back in. So make like a little top thing, and you can have different kinds of brushes. This is a round brush, which is a round 4, round 6, and the round ones are really the sort of the base ones that they tell people to start with, and it's easy to see why. They're really flexible. You can get, if you are careful, more careful than I am now, you can get relatively thin lines, or you can get relatively, hold on, let me get some more pigment, or you can get relatively put a little bit more water on here, get some more pigments. There you go. As I was saying before I interrupted myself so rudely, you can get relatively thin lines, or you can get much thicker lines. You see that with a round brush. And I find it easier, again, with the natural hair brush versus the synthetic brush. But whatever, whatever works for you, they can both do the same job. The slightly cleaner purple gets this slightly cleaner purple. And they both produce a purple, but one is clearly, to me and to my eyes at least, a little bit cleaner, whereas the other one has like a sort of a brownish dark cast to it. But you can do stuff like that. You can get the thin lines, the thick lines. The other thing you can do is you can go from a thin line to a thick line, back to a thin line. And again, that's easier to do with a natural hair brush again. But I hope that this very, very basic introduction, and I suggest too, when you first get your watercolor paints, you make the swatches that I've shown in my previous videos and that you saw earlier in this video, making a swatch card like this. Now, when I make mine, you'll see that they're super, super strong compared to, let's say right here. They're not necessarily as strong as they are here. That's because I go out of my way to make them as pigmented and as mass tone as possible, because I like that look for these. But you can also try to do a variegated wash and other such things. And we're going to talk about doing some of these things in a future episode. But for this episode, I just wanted to go into the very basics of what watercolor paints is, and how you use them, and the nature of watercolor paints. The other thing that I really like about watercolor paints is, once this dries, I can fold this over. It's healthier for your paints to let it all dry before you put it away. They can then be reactivated once they are dried, and you can pick up right where you left off the next day. So I really like that about watercolor paints. So just to recap, watercolor paints are made with a mixture of binder, which is gum arabic, plus pigment. You can make your own paints, and there's people who do it. Eve makes her own paints because companies do sell like a pre-made binder. Different companies have their own binder formulation. And they are soluble in water, obviously. You usually use fewer colors than you would in colored pencil art, where you would use pretty much, a full set of 120 is not unusual. I think it's Prismacolor, their full range goes up to 150, and Luminance has a quote-unquote smallish range with just 76 colors. Whereas taking 12 colors like this out on the field is really, well, 12 if you count the white, which a lot of people don't. It's really all you need for doing your artistic watercoloring. Let's see, what else did I want to recap? Their student and artist grade lines. One of the biggest differences between artist and student grade lines is that the artist grade lines tend to use more expensive, light, fast, and vibrant pigments, whereas inexpensive student lines will often use a smaller amount of a less expensive pigment. And let's see. And I think that's about it. So thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end. We will pick up in this another video where I will, what I'm going to do for the next video? For the next video, I'm going to swatch out all these 12 colors and talk to you about how I swatch. I'm going to do quite a slightly larger swatch. And I'm just going to do 12 colors of a particular swatch. Now, last thing I was almost going to forget. Watercolor paints come in a variety of sort of settings. They come in these little half pans. And they also come in the sets, so you can replace the half pans individually. They also come in sets, half pan sets like this. And you can also get full pans. This particular line I don't think is available in full pans in the US, but a lot of ranges are available in half and full pans. Some ranges are only available in one or the other. In addition to that, they are also sold in tubes, or tube sets. So this is a tube of 15 milliliter burnt sienna, and a and a small 5 milliliter tube of Indithrone Blue, which I have used up because you see I like that Indithrone Blue a lot. So, and then this is a tube set, and here is a bunch of tubes. You can see it's a bunch of tubes in there from this set that has been pre-picked out by Daniel Smith. But you can also buy individual tubes. Lastly, depending on the brand, some brands are really good about this. Daniel Smith in the US is probably a great one for buying a tube and then pouring it into half pans, and you can use it that way. And that's how you can purchase sets. Now, if you want to follow along with this, I suggest you get either a student grade set, like a Cotman set, or if you want to get an artist grade set, you can get Daniel Smith's set and pour it into half pans. I suggest you get this set that's predefined with these colors. I think it goes for like 22, 24. And get some burnt sienna in either a large tube or a small tube to go along with this set. And we're going to talk about why I love having burnt sienna around, and why I think burnt sienna is probably one of the most useful colors to have when you're first starting out, because you can get easy, nice, clean grays, which can be harder to do. But if you have a tube of burnt sienna, your life just became super easy if you get the set, because the set comes with a French ultramarine. So you add the French ultramarine to the burnt sienna, you get a beautiful gray. All right, I have been going off at the mouth for a long time, and I do apologize for that, but thank you guys so much for watching. These videos and these purchases are made possible thanks to the patrons over on Patreon, the people who donate via Coffee Link, which lets you make a $3 or a $3 interval donation via PayPal, as well as people who bookmark my various affiliate links for Amazon, as well as Jackson's Art, and all of that helps pay for the channel because Google AdSense does not pay well. So what really helps to pay for the expenses is your support, your financial support, as well as your kind words, which make a huge difference for me. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about this video. Don't forget to like and share it if you like it. It is a bit on the long side, but I feel with all this information, we can get started and we can start painting, and we can all be on the same level, and it'll be nice and awesome. So for the next video, we're going to do some swatching and some painting, and it's going to be super awesome. So I will see you guys next time. Bye.